Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business. Today we have Erin Johns with us, who it has quite an interesting story actually. I think most of us, start education with a baptism of fire, but perhaps this is the hottest fire of them all. Erin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can you just tell us a little bit about the story of your journey into the UK education system as a teacher?
Yeah, so I did all of my teacher training in the US, and I've got my undergraduate degree in elementary education, which is primary school age. And I I got married to somebody who's English and got a visa and moved over a month later. So I had never actually had my own classroom at that point, and was having to not only get used to being a teacher, but in a teacher in a system that I had never been in before as a student or as a teacher. So it was a big adjustment. It took me a while to find a job, and it was not the best school. And it was really, really hard. And teaching had always been my dream, had always been what I wanted to do. So it was really heartbreaking to struggle as much as I did.
Mm.
Um, Now, luckily, I did stick with it, ended up leaving and doing supply, which that I always recommend to other people that come from abroad to teach. I always say do a bit of supply because there are better schools out there than others. You need to just figure out what it is like, figure out what things you want to look for. And so I found that really invaluable and ended up doing supply at a school that I would then work at for the next 5 years until I left teaching. And that was a much better experience overall.
Your experience in the States compared to the UK, even as a student teacher, are there comparisons in terms of the stress levels or like certain schools that work really well, certain ones that just don't?
Yeah, so in the States, teaching is notoriously stressful. I think a big part of that is there is still really heavy workload. There also is much more expectation to fund your own classroom. So it was not unheard of for teachers to be spending, I mean, hundreds of dollars every year
Wow.
to buy paper and pens.
Mm.
And it's quite normal to, at the beginning of the school year, to put out to all the parents in your new class, I would like donations for all these things. It's just part of like the culture to do that. So that can be a really big strain. It is lower paid than I think a lot of other professional jobs in the States. And so there's also that.
Mm.
However, I have always said that I felt more trusted as a student teacher in the States than I think I ever was as a fully qualified teacher in England.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a big statement. So, I mean, look, maybe the word trust and using that in the UK education system isn't a surprise to people, look, because we know we don't feel that trusted. And certain schools do throw quite a lot of trust at teachers, whereas, which I feel that's in the minority now, whereas the majority is the other way. Why do you think that is? Like the trust, why is the trust there in the States, do you think?
As a as a student teacher, I mean, I definitely had my mentors who were fantastic, the teachers that I worked with, but you definitely are able to do a bit more of your own thing. You do get a lot of curriculum and schemes given to you, but you are trusted to know your class the
Okay.
best and to know your kids and to cover the content at whatever pace is needed in whatever order that you need to do as creatively as you want to. There's obviously limits,
Yeah.
but I felt like I had some freedom, and there wasn't an expectation for every class in that year group to be doing exactly the same thing because you were trusted to do what was best for your class, knowing that every class was going to be a bit different. And so when I came to England and started working, I remember just assuming that that was going to be the norm, and instead being really forced to work with it was my first school was three form entry, and really being forced to work in a very like scripted way almost of how I needed to do things. And I thought, but that doesn't work for my kids. Like I'd rather do it this other way. And I found that really hard. I think especially not only the cultural differences, but also being autistic, there were things that were unsaid but implied that I now can realize I did not pick up at the time.
Mm.
Um, Such as I ended up going off sick at this first job for a couple of weeks. When I came back, my room was completely rearranged. Um,
Oh,
and yeah, into like these certain groupings that I felt like didn't really work with my class. And I was like, well, I don't understand why this happened. So I moved my room back the way that it was before. Um, and eventually I like had to sit down and I was told very precisely, no, you need to have your room set up this other way. And I thought, oh, I didn't get that from me rearranging my room.
wow. Well,
Yeah.
that's quite intrusive as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that's not very supportive way of saying something, is it? Like it's very,
Yeah.
oh, I don't like that at all. No, that's horrible. Okay, that's really interesting. I know very little about the US system apart from the way the funding works in schools is also very different to the way the funding works here in the UK.
Mhm.
So in the UK, every child's given a certain amount, and however many children there are in a school, that's your budget. Albeit we have pupil premium, so any child's a pupil premium or has previously been a pupil premium child, there's more money. Whereas in the States, it's based on where you are in terms of like almost like a postcode, isn't it? I don't, or
Yeah.
zip code, and then taxes. The taxes come in, and so
It'd be
schools get.
similar to like council tax. Yeah.
So if you are in a deprived area, your school doesn't have any money, and it works to the budget. Whereas if you live in Beverly Hills, your school's got a ton of money, and it's very
Yep.
much I mean, from the outside looking in, it feels like a very unfair system in terms of the way the funding's split, whereas the UK maybe feels a little bit more fairer, but it still feels like there's not enough money, right? So I think in both scenarios there's like pros and cons. I can't, but I mean, what's your experience like of that? I mean, you lived there, right? So is it something which is as bad as it sounds, or is there ways in which people make it work to
With the
like,
funding.
yeah,
If you actually look at the numbers though, England, I don't know about Scotland, and Wales, but the per pupil funding is still, I think, incredibly low.
yeah, it's really
And
low.
if
Yeah,
you
it's
do
not great.
compare it to even the state I'm from, Arizona, which is quite a low funded state as far as education goes, um, I mean, and the comparison's actually really similar, and we're
Are
a
they?
low funded state. If you go to a
Right.
place like New York, they're spending three, four times the amount we do in England.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
So
it's just different.
overall, then, Erin, is it like in the UK we would be like sending our children to the deprived schools or in the deprived areas? That's the comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it just is what it is, and I think for a lot of Americans that they tend to be very almost isolated from ways how to do things in different ways.
Sure.
And so it's just nobody even really questions it. Like it's just property taxes is
Just what
how it was
happens.
based off of. So yeah,
Yeah, sure.
that's just how it's done.
That stuff's
Um,
always fascinated me. In a previous job, I used to do digital marketing for a company that was like still school based but global. We used to have to talk about these things and say, is the US a place where we could realistically go and sell this thing? And we'd have to do the research. So part of the research was obviously funding, the school funding,
yeah,
and we found that actually it was well, there probably were places that could afford it and do it, but actually it was that might have been the minority. So, and unless we went over there and actually did it, and I don't know if anybody else realizes this, but the States is absolutely massive. Like it's
yeah,
just absolutely huge. Like people consider their neighbors, but they're like 4 hour drive away. Like
yes,
that sort of stuff. Whereas we're like, I moan about driving half an hour down the road to Margate because I feel like that's a far drive. Anyway, look, all of that stuff, I love it. And I could talk about that forever because that's like, really interesting to me. But that's not why we're meeting. And we've got something far, far more important to talk about, which is neurodiversity in education. So tell me a little bit about your own experiences with this and how that's been a driver for you, like going forward and starting your own business.
yeah. So I am autistic, but I wasn't diagnosed until about a year ago. So yeah, quite much later in life, in my 30s. and only kind of figuring that out now. Looking back, I can see how much that shaped my life. It also makes sense as to why I love teaching because I love learning. I love knowledge, and different subjects. And so it's just kind of natural to then go into a career where I would just be passing on some of that love of different subjects. And the actual teaching part of it, I do absolutely love and adore, and I always will. What I struggled with was a lot of the unwritten rules, the stuff that wasn't quite said, a lot of the box ticking exercises. I really struggled to do those things. And so I definitely like probably rubbed people the wrong way, and maybe a bit of a pain in the backside for some of my senior leadership unintentionally. Um, but I can see that now. And I do think it's a big part of why I ended up leaving teaching and going into tutoring.
That's interesting, Erin, because I suppose it's now just in reflection. I mean, you've reflected back there on your time within education and how you can see how it's, or as a teacher, I should say, how it's kind of shaped relationships, been maybe provided some barriers along the way and friction, probably between yourself and others who I suppose would go along with the flow, right? Just because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Um, what about growing up? Like, can you reflect back at being younger? Was it something which you can see, that I now make sense, this makes sense to me now, I can make sense of some of these things, even when you were younger?
I was fortunate that school went well for me. I was within the gifted and talented program, and I think probably ended up getting in with people who understood me and friends that were around me that were probably really similar to me in many regards. So I'm quite fortunate with that. Um, but there's definitely always still this feeling of just not quite fitting. Um, Absolutely hated working in like larger groups, would feel like I would get spoken over really easily. Um, because it always just took me a little bit longer to process something before I could then verbalize it. So if I was ever doing any kind of group project, I might have great ideas, but nobody's gonna be listening to me because I'm still a couple of steps behind working it out in my head. And then somebody who's a bit more, has a bit of a bigger personality is already kind of taken us one way. So that was always a struggle, when I was in school. Um, Sensory wise, it wasn't really until I got much older that I started having difficulties. I can recognize now that when I was teaching, I definitely struggled with not having like sensory breaks almost. If I In primary school, it's obviously common to have break duties, and I recognize now that I struggled so much on the days that I had to do break duty because I absolutely needed that 10, 15 minutes in between lessons to just decompress and to just be silent and still and not have all the noise and the chaos. And I mean, being out on a primary school playground is chaos. Um, and so things like that, I definitely struggled with, and not recognizing that that was a need that I had because I was just doing what everybody else is doing, what I'm supposed to be doing. Um,
But what would a
and
symptom be? Let's say, Erin, you've had one of those days where you've got to go out to the playground, you don't have a break. Looking back now, what would be happening to you like for the rest of the day?
Really agitated, on edge. It's like this, my sort of sensory cup would almost be filled up to the max, and so being pushed over the edge was
Mm.
just so easy. Um, and I'm definitely somebody who internalizes things more than externalize. So for me, it really was my mental health that was affected, over the long term, and became a real struggle to the point where I had times where I couldn't work. There were times that I did luckily have a really wonderful head teacher for a big chunk of time at my second school, who was really supportive and recognized some of my struggles and put some supports in place. But without knowing exactly what was happening to me, I just thought I was mentally ill, basically.
Mm.
I just thought I was having mental health difficulties, I have anxiety. Um, I do have a diagnosis of complex PTSD as well. And I just thought it was that.
Mm.
And not realizing that, oh, actually it's because of all these other needs. And I do think that if I had known sooner that I could have advocated for myself better.
Is there an issue in primary schools around neurodiversity, not just with teachers, but with children as well? Do you think?
I think that a lot of us, when we went through our initial teacher training, had very little around neurodiversity. I mean, I certainly had never heard the word until a couple of years ago.
Mm.
And the training that we did have around autism, ADHD, and other neurodivergence was, I mean, I remember it being pretty limiting and outdated, very much focused on the sort of typical boy. And I definitely did not understand how it could often present in girls, um, how it can often present together in some of the other co-occurring conditions and things. So I think there's such a lack of training and such a lack of awareness. I do think it's getting better. And there's some amazing people who are going out and doing training and helping within schools. But yeah, until that's done, I just think the awareness is yeah, really lacking.
My experience of it with children has been, if somebody is an external,
Mm,
if the behavior is coming out externally, particularly with young children, so key stage one, it's picked up. And in most cases, they're not all the time, but in most cases, it's the boys, right? They'll flip the chair, they'll throw the table, storm
yeah,
out, climb the fence, tip the what we would consider like non-typical behavior for that age, quite extreme levels. And I've seen girls do that too. So I know that's not just boys, but majority of the time. But I've also seen with girls coming through way too many times this as well. And this is a bit where I think we do use the word fail very rarely, because I don't think we generally do fail many at this level. But I think girls in particular, we do, those who are neurodiverse. Some get to year 6 and then we go,
yeah,
oh, I see what you're saying now, mum. I see what you're saying now, dad. Right. Yeah. Can we start? And it's like, that's 4 years too late.
yeah,
And so by the time, and I don't know I know it's different wherever we are in the country, but where I live, it's a 2-year wait to
yeah,
go through the waiting list and then the assessments, and then get people involved that you have to, like people working at home with parents, people going into assessing school, and then the actual assessment itself, however that may look, can be 2 years.
yeah.
And I think,
It's
wow,
such a slow
yeah,
process. And it's comes way too late. Or we just sit and we wait and we say, oh, well, let's just see how they do, how they get on next year. Maybe they'll just settle in a bit better.
that's exactly it, isn't it, Erin? And I think particularly with, and I'll take the gender away from it, because this can be boys as well who've internalized. So if you've got somebody who is internalizing something and not being outwardly, I suppose, aggression, it really comes out
Mhm.
particularly when they're younger, because they don't know how else to do it. They can just mask and mask and mask, and then because our own knowledge and training is at a level which is very scratch the surface type approach, we're not able to deal with it as professionals in the room, or perhaps we're not recognizing the little signals and the little signs that might be coming up. And that's with our children. But even from like your experience, these things happen in adults as well. So it transpires over everything, doesn't it? Like, we're not even noticing it in ourselves, even, let alone in our other colleagues around us. So I think particularly the noise thing, and the whole stimulation. I think noise and just general stimulation in a classroom can be quite a thing. Classrooms are overly, I feel, a stimulating experience for some. What was that like in your classroom? Was that something that fed in, or was it feeding in now to your business?
What do you mean?
Like, with terms of like the overstimulation, how do you like manage? like that in your own business, just for you to begin with? But I also know that we're going to talk about your business in general, which is about supporting those who are neurodiverse. How does that impact in the way that you work yourself, but also how you work with others?
Yeah, so I try to be really sort of respectful of myself and where I'm at, and know that it is okay as far as like running the business, that ultimately most things can wait the next day if I need it to. And it's lovely to have that flexibility to be able to say, I'm going to focus on the things that I know absolutely have to get done, which might be just those lessons that day. And, the marketing or this admin work, it can wait, and it's not all going to go down in flames, and that's okay. And I just need to
Yeah.
respect where I'm at. And if I do need a day where I'm just am recharging and I'm just not putting that pressure on myself and just being really compassionate with myself and where I'm at. Um, when I'm actually teaching and tutoring, I do have a really calm approach with it and really gentle, which I think works well for a lot of the kids that I work with, most of whom are neurodivergent. And I also try to make sure that it's a really accessible place. So many of the children that I work with have left school because of school trauma, autistic or ADHD burnout. And with me, they're often just kind of dipping their toe back into any kind of learning and education. And so, I mean, I've had kids join in on the Zoom call, no camera, no mic. They don't type into me. They just kind of have it on in the background just so that they can kind of check it out and see, okay, what is this person about? Until they very, very slowly build up that trust. And it works really well. I mean, sometimes they might find, no, I'm not ready for anything that looks even remotely like work. And other times they're like, okay, this isn't too bad. And actually she's being really patient, and oh, she's not like rushing me to move on, and she's explaining things again. And you can also do that, you do with tuition, is having those really small groups where you can do that. And it's not the child getting lost in a classroom of 30, 32. Especially the ones who do internalize more, who will often get lost and get unnoticed, but be absolutely struggling inside.
So your business now, Erin, tell us a little bit about that, because we kind of like hinted there about what it really is that you do and how you've used your experiences to find. I almost don't want to like dehumanize it, but I'm going to with just this word right now. You found that niche, right, that
Mm.
really works and that it's absolutely needed. So how have you used that experience to build your business? Just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I tutor almost exclusively online, and I work with neurodivergent kids age 7 to 14, roughly. Mostly home educated. Most of them have had school trauma, been in burnout, just getting back into it. And I didn't always have that niche. I just kind of generally went into tutoring because I left teaching and it was the natural sort of option for me. But I noticed that that just kind of naturally became my audience and became the kids that I worked with. And I was drawn to them and they were drawn to me, and it just clicked. And actually, even looking back at my teaching career, there's a number of kids I can think back now. It's like, oh, I really connected with that kid. And actually, that makes sense. Like they 100%. And some of them I actually do know later on did get diagnosed ADHD or autistic, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. Like we find each other,
Yeah.
um, and connect in that way. And I when I got when I started exploring my own neurodivergence and sought a diagnosis, I toyed whether or not I was even going to be public and open about it. And because it feels very vulnerable,
Mm.
incredibly vulnerable, and wondering, am I going to be judged for this? Are parents even going to want to hire me? And I just went with it. And actually, it's been the best decision. And I've had kids that have, their parents have showed my like social media page to them, and they've resonated with the things that I've posted on there. And they're like, yeah, I want to work with her. And they feel like they have somebody who gets them, who actually, understands it and who can really empathize with them on on a really personal level. And we actually talk about it. I had a lesson about with my Key Stage 3 English. We had a lesson about the use of language and how social groups can have different words that we use. And one said, well, like autistic people, we use words like shutdown and meltdown and pathological demand avoidance. And actually it was a really lovely discussion about, okay, well, what are some of the other words and how does that kind of bring us together and what are some of the language that we can use? And it was lovely being able to have that discussion with this small group of mostly autistic kids, and just looking at that together.
That must be so empowering. In terms of like, right, let's talk, because is that's you was talking earlier on about like the unwritten rules almost,
Mm,
and like to have that as a group of people where you can just go, right, yeah, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm hearing, this is the way that it is for, and I'm sure there are commonalities between people, but also like the whole idea of neurodiversity is that it is diverse, right? We all have our
mm.
own like ways of experiencing the world and the way we perceive it, which can make life really tricky. The other thing there that sprung into mind was this whole patience thing, Erin. Like, because you really understand like the frustrations that can happen when someone's like, "You've done it yet? Right, we need to go to this bit.
Mhm.
We need to go here. Right, we haven't got time to do." Did you have something in your life growing up that was like that with you? Is it something that you think you've seen before?
I think I, when I left teaching, I recognized that there were a lot of times that I was the problem and that I definitely did not do my best teaching because of the outside pressure beyond my classroom, which of course comes from even beyond the school.
Mm.
And so there were times that I absolutely let kids kind of slip through the net because especially year six, SATs year, you're told like these are the ones who are going to pass, these are the ones who are borderline. We've got to really focus in on them. And, here's these other ones. Well, they're not really causing a fuss. And there is definitely sort of a culture of doing that in
Isn't that
some
awful?
schools.
Just hearing
It
someone say
is.
that is awful, isn't it?
It is. And but that is the pressured
The
environment that it's
reality. That
become.
is the reality of year six people progress there. That is it, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah. And so I absolutely can look back and see a number of kids that, and again, I won't use the words I failed them because I don't think I failed them.
No,
I
no.
think I did the best that I could at the time. But I can definitely see, okay, wow, if I had more of an understanding, I would have done that differently. And I'm not okay with a system that is,
I was gonna say, well, I think that's the bit, isn't it? Like, do you really think that? Because I mean, like, I taught year six for quite a few years. There's not a lot of time for patience, is there? There's
yeah,
actually not a lot of space to go, they're not getting it. Why don't we do this again tomorrow? And we'll change tact. We'll be a bit more creative. We'll give them access, but from a different direction. Can't do that
no,
because there's not enough time to fit it all in year six anyway,
no,
let
no,
alone taking some time out. And often have to talk to parents about when we're managing expectations around certain things. But I think particularly with maths, I have a big bee in my bonnet about the maths system in this country. It's just way too much, way too early, and we don't get a chance to really solidify anything. It's like, well, we'll do a week of area and perimeter in year two, and then we'll do another week in year three. And there's a whole year in between where we don't do it.
yeah.
And so you can never solidify, and that's me picking on one little bit, but that's generally mirrored in particularly
Mhm.
the maths and science curriculum. I know English is a little bit more fluid, but essentially the same. So there's not a lot of time for patience, I don't find, because you just have to keep going on to the next thing and the next thing.
Mhm.
What about growing up in the States? Was there somebody who you experienced as a teacher or almost somebody you see as a mentor? It doesn't have to be a teacher. I often think that we forget about support staff when we talk about this kind of thing, but someone who showed you that patience and another way of doing things.
Yeah, I generally had some really good teachers. Ones who weren't definitely stand out as well.
Mm.
But I had a great history teacher, and history from then on was always my favorite subject. And it was because he loved history. And so I tapped into that in me. And so I fell in love with the subject. And that was when I was, I don't know, 12, 13. And I was fortunate to actually continue having really great history and government teachers. I had another one in high school where I wasn't even his student anymore. I had left his class, and the next teacher was not explaining things in enough depth. And some of the study skills I was struggling with and knowing how to get through all of the reading that we had to do. And I remember actually going to my former teacher after school one day and I just said, I'm finding this really hard. And you did some of it last year. Can you just help me out? And he took, I don't know, a good hour of his time after school to sit down and go through like how you actually read through and annotate a big history text and pick it apart. And here's the skills that you need. And yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. And again, I wasn't even a student at that point.
Oh,
He had
wow.
no reason that he needed to do that other than he saw that I was struggling and he knew that he could help.
Mm. Just the love of doing it.
Mm,
Mm. Okay. Interesting. I think that we often pick up these little things along the way that which I've considered softer skills, but they do lead into something that I think is quite the magical part of teaching,
yeah.
which I don't think gets enough um enough credit. Time's so precious, right? And I believe this inside and outside of the teaching education. I don't think it. I know we're pressed for time in teaching, but there'll be a lot of professions out there who say they're pressed for time in whatever they do. But there is something about giving someone some time to share a skill or piece of expertise that's going to help them move from point A to point B. And I'm going to say, like, you might, let's say I don't know how many times that happened, Erin. Like, so maybe it only happened once, but let's say it happened 3 or 4 times. That's probably it. Right. So once you've got that skill, it is there forever. So the investment of time there is just worth it for everybody. One, because somebody's passionate about it, so it probably doesn't even feel like they're working or doing anything special. They're just doing what they know and what they love. And on the other side, the recipient of that is like, wow, this is amazing.
Mhm.
I'm getting this and I won't go too far back, but I recorded something a few weeks ago because I went to this business conference and there's a guy there who was talking about celebrity customer service, but really what it was about what could you do that goes over and above.
Mhm.
What could you be doing? And nothing that's like about time. It was about looking at how can you make people feel special? How do you make people feel like that celebrity? And it was quite a funny leading because it was like if Brad Pitt phoned you up or George Clooney phoned you up and they said they wanted tuition at 1 o'clock in the morning, what would you do? And most, it's like, yeah, okay, get on Zoom call now and we'll do it. And I record it and I'm going to share it on all my socials, right? You would do that, but you probably wouldn't do that for any sort of not like I would consider normal individual, but
Mm,
possibly. But why not? And actually, if you make people feel special and you meet them at their point of need, it's just what I'm getting from yourself is that you're just saying, look, let's do this lesson. This is what it's about, but I'm going to teach you with a bucket of patience and understanding and empathy. And for as long as we need to, we can do it the way that you need to do it. That's going to
mhm.
help you. It takes small steps forward. Um, the next stage of your business sounds very interesting too, because it's now not just about tuition. You're saying you're working with the lovely Samantha,
Oh yeah.
McMahon, who's supporting you in the next phase of your business. Tell us about what's next.
Yeah, so she really helped me to figure out how I could grow my business without necessarily adding on tutors. Might be something I would do in the future, but not something that I wanted to do right now. And so looking at, well, what else can you offer the client base you already have? So neurodivergent, home educated kids. And I noticed that there is almost too much information out there as far as like resources and what could you teach them. And it can be really overwhelming. And one thing that I really love and I think works really well for most kids, but especially neurodivergent ones who need a bit more, they won't just do things for the sake of it. They need to have some sort of purpose and connection to it, is I love cross-curricular. teaching. And so I'm going to be putting together lesson plans. I'm not even calling them lesson plans. Calling them, what did I even call them? Learning guides. They're going to be very parent friendly and all cross curricular, chosen by the membership that is part of it. And just being able to pull in all different areas, science, maths, English, history, under one umbrella, and be able to help them to sequence, okay, well, here's a question that you can start with and you can investigate, and here's how you could stretch it. Here's how you could support, maybe you're younger or ones that just need that little bit of extra. And so I'm going to put that together for them and then have some pre-recorded content connected to those learning guides. And I also have a well-being element that I want to include. I don't know exactly how that's going to look, but because of my audience, they, for a large part, are only just getting back into learning after sometimes months and months of being out of school, being completely disengaged. And so well-being is a big passion. And it's that recognition that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't feel safe, if you don't feel a sense of belonging, you're not going to be able to access algebra. You're just not going to be able to. And so it's also looking at addressing some of those needs as well. And I'm fortunate that my fiance is a CAMS nurse. She's also neurodivergent, so she's ADHD. I'm autistic. We're a great team together. And so she's going to be delivering some sessions as well to this membership that I'm making.
Wow, it sounds absolutely fascinating and exactly what people will need. Like, you're right about the information, but also the misinformation, because there's so much out there. How do you pick and choose what you listen to? I mean, look, we've already alluded to the fact that even in our professionals who are working with these people day in, day out only get what we would consider bare basics, if that. And so if you're a parent and you're looking for advice, where do you go? You go to social media, you go to the internet, you go to chat forums. There's just so many different things out there. And we know that it's not a one size fits all situation. So to be able to go to an expert who is already supporting them in most cases, because like you say, these things generally start with our current clients, the people who are already teaching. So we just continue to support them and then it grows from there.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes sense. And you're going to know these children and young people as well, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm actually really excited about what's going to happen for you over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, because it's really needed. Erin, we need to make a decision to do a part 2 in about 18 months time to
Okay.
see how it's all going, because this is something I think is really needed, and it'll be interesting to sort of hear the next stage of your journey. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. And do you know what? You're really calming influence. I feel like sometimes the podcast, love doing the podcast. I love chatting to people, but it can feel like quite fast paced, but it's been very, very relaxing. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. There's so much to offer. So what's the best way for people to find out more, Erin?
So on social media, I'm Erin Johns, neurodiversity tutor. My website is neurodiversitytutor.com. Probably the easiest ways to find me.
Okay, we'll share some links in all the notes so that people can get to find it really easily. So we'll put it on YouTube, Spotify, but also when I promote it in the group, it'll be in there too, and make sure it's in all the notes. Erin, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.